into some hot water with his own party. He lost his chairmanship of the Fisheries Committee because he opposed the summer job attestation, where you would say you would only give money to groups that would support abortion rights. Sims has a very religious population in his riding. This is sort of the Bible Belt of Newfoundland, if such a thing exists. Big Pentecostal population, and he was certainly playing to the wishes of his riding when he took that stand, and it cost him the seat, despite the fact, Rosie, he chaired Justin Trudeau's Liberal leadership campaign in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, so no hard feelings, I guess, as it turns out. Let me show you this map. Again, it's very early results. Don't expect that part to stay blue necessarily. Certainly not in that riding, but this is what we're going to look at through the night. It will grow bigger and bigger as we include more parts of the country, and you will see from the colors sort of the trend lines of this. Of course, last time this was all red. And we will see what color it turns throughout the night, and then we'll show you things as more results come in. 15 minutes away right now from maritime results, 25 seats in total. Very early reporting so far in Newfoundland and Labrador. This is what happens with elections, and when you get to 9:30, all hell breaks loose, frankly, because you've got 263 ridings that start reporting, and then that's when things start getting a little bit wild. Bashi.
I think especially when the rest of the Atlantic ridings come in, I want to pick up on something Althea mentioned, and that is the effect of the strategic voting message in 2015. I'm curious to see what kind of effect, and we'll probably only see some of that in the Atlantic, obviously, and particularly in Ontario, that might resonate. But there was a sharpened message from both the Liberals and to a certain degree the Conservatives over the past 7-8 days. You have to vote for us in order to keep the other people out. It's a different type of message because there's no Stephen Harper, for example, on the other side of it in this election. So I'm very curious to see to what degree did that resonate with people. I think we might get our first indication of that in Atlantic Canada, but again, you got to see more before you can decide whether or not that's had an impact.
Yeah, I mean, when you use that against a government that's been around for 10 years, you can see how that works. But when you're using it to say, we just want to stop a guy you've never seen before because we think he probably is going to cut things, that becomes a little
like
more...
Doug Ford.
Maybe that resonated. I'm not sure. David, you wanted in there, I think.
Yeah, you can see some of that argument, though, the casting back to the Stephen Harper years with the ads that Lawrence Macaulay did in particular. Like, to summarize them was like, used to have stuff, Harper took the stuff, we gave the stuff back, vote Liberal. It was kind of a very simple message that, you know, they had Macaulay front and center. They talked about the retirement age being raised from 65 to 67, veterans' offices being closed, things like this that really matter in smaller, more isolated communities. A loss of service from, you know, veterans' office closes in place in like Corner Brook. So I mean, they tried to go after that with dialing it back to the Harper years, and that is the challenge for Scheer in being so unknown and so undefined that they were able to do some of it.
Although I would say that as much as it's uncertain whether that strategy worked, I'm also not clear that this big, scary coalition that was only mentioned once actually worked either. Like, I don't know whether that penetrated in any way and whether that's actually a big, scary thing anymore for Canadians.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Jagmeet Singh kind of mentioned it on a Sunday, walked it back on a Monday, resurrected it again on a Tuesday. I know. And he sort of walked it back a couple of times, and Trudeau never mentioned it once, and Scheer said, well, this is proof. This is happening. And, you know, I'm not sure. Oh, we have a new result. It looks like...
Okay, well, something's going... It looks like Scott Sims has come back.
Yes, reports of his demise were greatly exaggerated as we have new results from Costa Bay, Central Notre Dame that we can hopefully get up. He's gone from being down by 13 votes, I think is what it was in the last one that we saw. Oh, to look at that. He's barnstorming away with it now. It's 44 to 26. Scott Sims with an 18-vote lead over Conservative Alex Brackey. You know, Rosie, my people are fast talkers. They're slow counters, especially in a live television environment. And my sense is because there are people still in polling stations and they can't start the count until they get everybody out of there and lock her up.
Right, and once you're in, you're in. So you get to still go through and do your thing. I'm glad you said that about your people because I shouldn't have gotten away with it. Okay, we're still standing by for more results. Obviously, it gets slow in the beginning and it gets fast as the night goes on. David Common is going to help track some of the pace of that night. You look like you're having fun. He's in the Greater Toronto area. He's at some sort of wild party or something.
Yeah, that's exact.
Hello?
Dear citizen, this is to notify you that, due to a certain suspicious activities related to your Social Security number, you have been forced to suspend your Social Security
They're going to delete my Social Security number. Oh, no.
All your social benefits will be canceled until further clearance. In case you feel the
Oh, no, my Social Security number. Fuck's sake. Oh,
Exactly it, Rosie.
They got another seat.
They're very involved in what's going on.
So there's 12 voters,
three
there's 12
seats
watchers
now.
for
Oh
us
my
tonight.
God.
Thanks, David. David's going to be moving through the GTA through the night. We'll see how many people and how many ridings he can hit. David Cochran's got some more results now.
Yeah, Rosie, it takes a good kitchen party to get votes moving in Newfoundland and Labrador. We now have results from 3 ridings. Here's Bob Commons. This is the riding on the west coast of the island of Newfoundland. This is the real base of Liberal strength at the federal level and the provincial level. This is where the Premier has his seat. And Rosie, this is where Brian Tobin used to run up big majorities back when he was in federal politics.
Okay, and these are very well-known local candidates that we're seeing, and that's what works in Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, it works everywhere, but
Yeah, no, they're all very well known. Churence Rogers was he was the former president of the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador, the former head of the Federation of Municipalities, and he stands out because his name is Churence, which he said his mother created, which is an unusual name in Newfoundland. Scott Sims is well known as a former TV weather guy, very popular in central Newfoundland. He gives a lot of speeches at the Hotel Gander, and they have a box there that's called Scott's Box because he's not that tall, and it's what he stands on to see over the podium, and he makes a big production out of it every time. And Goody Hutchings, well-known business person, comes from a strong Liberal family. If either of those 3 were to lose tonight, Andrew Scheer would be declared Prime Minister before polls open in Maritimes.
okay. And just so you're wondering what the heck is going on, there's less than 300 votes counted in the province so far. So as David points out, it may be slow going if people were lined up and still waiting to vote before the counting could begin. And so once that gets resolved, it's not that the polls were open longer, it's just that that's taking a little bit longer for them to come in. Maritimes, though, they close in 10 minutes time. So we'll have 25 more ridings where we'll start to see changes. This is what the map looks like right now. Leading or elected in 3 ridings, that is the Liberal Party. No one else on the board for now, but very, very early numbers right now. Duncan McHugh, let's go back to you. I imagine you've talked to some people in Atlantic Canada, and what was the impression that they left you with in terms of the things that they were thinking about during this election?
I want to, and I'm talking with people online as well. I'm going to share that over the course of the evening, and I'll tell you right now, it's a lot of fear. People, I mean, Christine Brody shared this. I've never been so scared to see what our government is going to look like after an election. That seems to be the prevailing feeling on the CBC Facebook page. But I want to pick up on a point that you mentioned about the Greens. We're about 10 minutes away from the Maritimes opening. Last election, I was with Elizabeth May at Green headquarters. There was talk about a green wave, a green surge. Yeah, that didn't happen. It was Elizabeth May's seat. They're talking about it again. And so I'm watching to see how they do in the Maritimes. They're very much hoping to make inroads in the Maritimes. Of course, the Greens did well provincially in New Brunswick, in PEI. And if the Greens can take a seat in the Maritimes, that will be a victory for them. But they may also cut into Liberal votes, and that could make a big difference in the Maritimes. 4 seats up for grab in PEI, which may be small in the grand picture of things, but for the Greens, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and they provincially form official opposition, the Green Party. So there is obviously an openness to the Green Party on the island. David Cochran's got some more results.
Yeah, we have a torrent of results coming in now from Newfoundland and Labrador. We have results from Labrador, the big land where Yvonne Jones
8.
has a narrow 2-vote lead over the New Democrat. I don't know what is happening there tonight. Jones has represented parts of Labrador either in the provincial legislature or the federal legislature for 20 years because he's a very good campaigner, a popular district, local politician, very likely to be reelected tonight. And here's Ken McDonald, the former mayor of Conception Bay South, which is the biggest population center in the riding of Avalon. He has a 26-vote lead over Matthew Chapman. There was a point where the Conservatives were hoping to get former Premier Paul Davis to run for them there to get a big name. They didn't get the big name. Instead, they got a big guy. Matt Chapman's a 6'8" former university basketball player, but coming up short right now in Avalon. Seamus O'Regan, the cabinet minister for Newfoundland and Labrador, with a 24-vote lead over Anne-Marie Anderson for the New Democrats. O'Regan had to take time away from the campaign trail because his father was hospitalized during this campaign. At times it looked quite severe, but I heard today that he's up, he's awake in the hospital, and he's watching the show tonight.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Only 700 votes so far. So yeah, this is slow. And you'll notice, if I can just show you the map once again, while we have leading in all these ridings where there's red, that little tip on the end is where St. John's East is, and we don't have anything yet from St. John's East. So this will make for a nervous night. Is Jack Harris a nervous fellow?
Look at your belt.
An anxious fellow?
Yeah, I think a little bit. He's got a lot invested here.
Yeah, that's right. So we will wait and see what what's going on there. I don't think anyone should think that this is abnormal at this stage. Things are slow and a little strange. We don't have anything from St. John's East, but I'm sure we will quickly. In 6 minutes' time, we will get more results coming in from the Maritimes. That's Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. That will start to give us a better sense of what is happening in the Atlantic provinces. But while we are here and while we are talking about the potential rise of the Green Party, at least in terms of vote share, let's go back and take a look at Elizabeth May's 40 days in 40 seconds.
This election is about telling the truth to Canadians about how serious the climate emergency really is. We need to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible.
We're certainly not a one-issue party.
Bring in real pharmacare, canceling tuitions. We want to ensure that no one is left homeless and bringing in guaranteed livable income. I'm not a woman who will ever, ever, ever retreat from the right of a woman to a safe and legal abortion, and that's our party policy. He's not a separatist. We will not have a candidate who thinks they can work to break up our country. That's not on. Smile and vote green. It feels good. To avoid catastrophic levels of global warming, we must not build the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's so heartbreaking for me to look at you today and know you could have done so much more the last 4 years. Please, God, you don't get a majority.
All right, Tanya Fletcher is in British Columbia tonight, and she's standing by at Green Party headquarters. Tanya, what's the mood there tonight?
Well, Rosie, it's quite relaxed, and much like Elizabeth May herself over the past few days, the leader is expected to be here in a couple of hours, and she's going to watch the results come in with her supporters here in Victoria. She is very confident, and she's the most experienced leader heading into this. This is her fourth federal election, and spending the past couple of days with her through the home stretch of her campaign, she was on Vancouver Island. We hit 6 ridings in 2 days, and this is clearly where they're throwing all of their hopes. Right now, most of those ridings belong to the NDP, and you can tell that's where the main tug-of-war is in this battleground that is Vancouver Island. You hear some pretty nasty attack ads, and the Greens accuse the NDP of circulating misleading leaflets. And I asked Elizabeth May herself how this campaign compared to years past. She said by far this is the nastiest and dirtiest campaign, with the smear tactics and the mudslinging. And she's very she almost goes rogue as a leader. She doesn't stick to a script. And so you see that in the past few years, and you wonder when that is going to take effect. The Greens have struggled in the polls through the course of that campaign, and they've really struggled to really get that momentum going, especially on the heels of critical timing. We saw the climate rallies across the globe, and perhaps Greta Thunberg has been her greatest campaigner, and yet will she be able to leverage that environmental momentum on behalf of the Greens? That will be yet to be seen, but she'll be here in a few hours regardless. Rosie?
Okay, Tanya Fletcher keeping an eye on things out there in Victoria, British Columbia. Okay, meanwhile, polls closing in the Maritimes in just over 3 minutes' time as we await for more results from Newfoundland and Labrador. But Heather is going to be watching a couple of places here in the Maritimes. Tell us what you're expecting.
Well, Elizabeth May was targeting PEI, so why don't we start there? And the question is, could the island's famous sands be shifting perhaps tonight? The island has been reliably red for decades, Rosie, but as Duncan was mentioning, last April in the provincial election, the Green Party got 30% of the vote, and that was enough to form the official opposition in the province for the very first time in Canada. So could PEI give the Greens another historic breakthrough tonight? As for Nova Scotia, as we watch that province, the Liberals won all 11 ridings last election. Everyone suggested that's unlikely to happen again tonight. There is a true blue base in rural mainland Nova Scotia. Keep in mind the number 5, because that's the number of incumbents, Liberal incumbents, who are not running for re-election this time. That's nearly half. Conservatives has strategically tapped provincial MLAs to run in most of those ridings, including Mr. Cuzner's riding, Cape Breton-Canso, West Nova as well. We'll be watching those. They are high-profile candidates. They are experienced, and they're likely, Rosie, to make things very interesting in a province with a history of epic Liberal-Conservative battles.
Okay, some things to keep in mind as we get ready for polls to close. In the Maritimes, 2,700 votes counted in Newfoundland and Labrador so far. The pace is picking up. Things will start to come in a little bit quicker. Ian's watching New Brunswick, his home province.
We've touched on this already in the election special. Not even the most optimistic Liberals in New Brunswick expect to go 10-0 in the province of New Brunswick tonight. Traditionally, the southern part of the province is where the Conservatives have been very strong. And if there is to be change in New Brunswick, it will likely happen in the southern part of the province. Let's look at three of the ridings where I think both parties would expect to see the Conservatives do very well. And we're going to start with New Brunswick Southwest. This is one of the ridings where MPs who lost their seats for the Conservatives last time around, there are three of them, are running tonight. John Williamson is one of those. And I'll tell you, over the years, some huge margins. He won in the election in 2011 by more than 10,000 votes. In fact, the Liberals placed third in the riding back then. Tobique-Mactaquac is another one of the ridings where the Conservatives have done very well. And again, I'm just looking at this from back in 2011. 15,000 votes was the margin of victory for the Conservatives then. And one last riding, Fundy Royal. In the long history of this riding, which is more than 100 years, Conservatives or progressive Conservatives have won in this riding every single time, with two exceptions. Paul Zed won back in 1993 for a single term, and Elena Lockhart, of course, 4 years ago. So she has not only a formidable opponent there, Rob Moore, but also the weight of history against her.
Yeah, and some well-known, as you say, people that used to be MPs trying to come back and regain those seats for the Conservative Party. Just show you the map one more time, if I can, before we go and get some more results from the Maritimes. This is what Newfoundland and Labrador looks like right now. 4,000 votes or so have been counted so far, so lots more to come, obviously. And that little tip on the very east, St. John's East, still not reporting anything at this hour, and that is the place where we expect to see a tighter battle between the NDP and the Liberals. So we'll get more information to see if anything's going on there. In the meantime, now we've got 25 seats coming in fast now from the Maritimes, from Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. That will bring us up to 32 seats so far. Stay with us. We'll bring you more results starting right now.
Federation
Welcome to Canada Votes. Tonight marks the culmination of 40 days and 40 nights of a relentless campaign.
Who can you trust?
Who can you count on?
Who would like us to go further?
A campaign of promises, policies, attacks, and some surprises.
The interests of Quebec.
Putting people first.
Addressing the climate crisis.
Now it is voting time.
I vote.
I vote.
I vote because it's a privilege.
Because democracy is sacred.
I vote because I'm Canadian.
The power is in your hands, and tonight we find out the results. This is Election Night 2019. And good evening, I'm Rosemary Barton here in our CBC News Canada Votes headquarters. Polls have just closed in the Maritimes. That means PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. That's 24 more ridings we will start to watch to add to the count at the bottom of your screen there. Those are the numbers so far just coming in from Newfoundland and Labrador. They have had at least the beginning of their say. These are still very early days in the counting. We'll now find out how the rest of Atlantic Canada has voted. First, let's go to David Cochran, who can bring us up to date on what we're seeing so far. David.
Yeah, Rosie, we've got the Liberals leading in 6 seats right now. Those are the seats that are in the rural parts of Newfoundland and, of course, in Labrador and in St. John's South Mount Pearl. The one we're all waiting on is some results from St. John's East, which the full expectation is that is going to be the closest race in that province of the night. I was speaking to people who were in polling stations in St. John's East. They were in a lineup there. They had the doors locked behind them. This is why results are slow. You can't start the count until everybody has voted and everybody is out. So that rematch between Nick Whalen and Jack Harris is the seat that everyone is watching in Newfoundland and Labrador. And of course, it's the only one we don't have any numbers.
Because that's just the way it goes. I should say that we're hearing that they haven't even started the counting there yet. So I don't know how long that line was when they closed the doors, but it's long enough that it's taking them a while to get them out and start counting. Yeah. So that's why we're not seeing anything there. So nothing untoward, but just allowing people to make sure they cast their ballot and make sure they do that before things stop. Okay,
for the
I
entire
think Louise Martin is standing by now in Charlottetown PEI. It looks like she's chatting with
What up,
someone.
G-Hughes?
So we'll get her to talk.
Alexander
Look, she's chatting with the
Westman.
leader of the Green Party. Of course she is. That's who I knew well. Peter Bevan Baker. And so this is where, of course, the PEI has had some attraction to the Green Party. And
Your
maybe that will
volume
happen
can
federally
go
too.
up
Tell
a
us what
little.
you're hearing from Mr. Baker there.
On the
Well, you know what? That's the big
CBC
question, right,
stream
Rosemary?
or
Is it
me
can the
speaking?
galvanization of the Green Party provincially spread federally? And so I'll ask the Green Party leader here on Prince Edward Island. What do you think? Will it rub off federally?
I think it's entirely possible, and you see across the country when Greens get elected at the provincial level, they tend to attract more Greens to get elected in the same province. So it's sort of like you get a taste of Green, and you go, oh, I think I'd like some more of that. So I think it's entirely possible that we'll see here in the Atlantic region some very close races, and perhaps even some Greens getting elected here on PEI. And perhaps in Fredericton, there's a young candidate there, Jenica, who is fabulous. So we may well see some Greens elected in Atlantic Canada for the first time ever.
Now, a lot of the popularity that you had heading into the provincial election, the polling numbers were saying you were the most popular leader going into that. So does Elizabeth May have that same lure with her as a leader?
I think Elizabeth has absolutely done a fabulous job as the leader of this party for the last 13 years. It's very difficult on the federal platform, as opposed to the intimacy of politics that we have here on PEI, to make that sort of impression, even though she's been around for so long. So I'm not sure that we're going to see the same sorts of breakthroughs that we saw here on PEI at a national level. But I do think that, as we did here on PEI, these successes don't come overnight. It takes years and years of building and really creating a credibility and a comfort for voters in order for Greens to be elected. We did it here on PEI. I'm not sure we're there nationally yet, but I think we will see, particularly on the West Coast, absolutely some more Greens elected, and hopefully again here in the Maritimes.
And I think you can't underestimate, you just mentioned a small province, intimate, people know each other. You can't underestimate the power of the four incumbents that we have here on the island.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. Politics is very personal here.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. We have to go. Thank you so much. That is our Green Party leader, Prince Edward Island Green Party leader, Peter Bevan Baker. Back to you, Rosemary.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Charlottetown is the one place where the Greens could build up their support a little bit. I thought the Green Party leader was pretty honest in his assessment about the real chances they have. And I think you were with Elizabeth May a couple days ago. I don't know. You were all over the country in about a week. So is this, I mean, I know she's indicated in the past that she is sort of interested in retiring regardless of how things go. But I wonder if she hadn't said that, would this sort of be the make or break moment for Elizabeth May tonight if she can't get more than 1, 2, 3 seats? I don't know.
I get the sense Elizabeth May would rather retire more than Green Party members would like Elizabeth May to retire. There's a lot of love and affection for Elizabeth May. I think
am
her
Canadian,
husband
unlike most
is elected in the
Americans.
Interior
We know
British Columbia.
geography.
She may decide that she wants to stay a little bit longer.
Greens are like
You mentioned I was with her about a week and a half ago. I
like
landed in
Pelosi.
Fredericton. This is a seat, I think this is probably the most viable seat for the Greens. Peter Bevan Baker mentioned they're running a candidate, Jenica Atwin. Young woman, pretty interesting, Fredericton South. So part of the Fredericton riding is held provincially by the Greens as well. Has been a Green seat since 2014.
Who said that I like
that woman? I think you interviewed Marcus Harvey, that undecided voter.
Yes.
Who was on with Andrew Scheer. He has come out and said he is supporting Jenica Atwin in that riding. Yeah, interesting. I love that look on your face.
He was like, I left him diehard conservative, and he flipped totally the other way.
Yep, she has convinced him. I actually sat on his front porch with Elizabeth May and Jenica Atwin as the two women tried to convince him to vote Green. Apparently, he's a big local figure, and this endorsement was worth quite a bit. And after we left his front porch, we got into a Tesla because she's driving a carbon-free campaign. We drove to Charlottetown, where she bunked with Peter Bevan Baker. Because it's a very low-key affair, the Green Party campaign. And she was campaigning in Charlottetown and Cardigan, where they're trying to off-seat Lawrence McCauley, who's had the seat since 1988. They're running an 80-year-old named Glenn Beaton, I think. His daughter actually won the seat for the Greens. And when he was door knocking with her, he decided, hey, this is something maybe I should do. So he's throwing his hat in the ring.
So it's very local.
It's very local.
The Green campaign is very local. Yeah. Okay, we have some results coming. The counting has started, rather, in St. John's East. So we're going to go to Peter Cowan. You want to do that now? Peter Cowan back in St. John's East. And he's got some news. I see a thumbs up, so let's go and hear from you there, Peter.
Rosemary, Elections Canada has certainly been keeping everyone's blood pressure high here. Everyone's been wanting to see the results in this race that is expected to be really close. And what we're hearing from the NDP volunteers is the reason we haven't seen results until now is at the very last minute, there were quite a few young people who went and wanted to vote. They needed to be sworn in, they needed to be added to the voters list, and that takes more paperwork and that takes more time. And so they're not able to open up the ballot boxes and start counting until everyone's actually cast their vote. So the good news is that has happened and the voting has started. And so hopefully now we're going to start to see more of those results come in and everyone can hopefully relax a little. We'll see.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the update. Let me go to David Cochran, who might have some news there. David?
I'm not sure. We have seven Liberals now reporting, so we do have new results from somewhere. I don't think it's in St. John's East. It's probably somewhere else in the rest of Atlantic
Yeah,
Canada.
I think it's Malpeque. I think it's in PEI. Is that possible? Yeah.
But you know,
Sorry
it's
about that,
interesting.
David.
Sorry, David. It's interesting to start there in PEI because as you've been talking about the Green, it's interesting. Wayne Easter, who has been there, this is his 9th term, as he runs for his 9th term, but he actually said he's more concerned about the Green opponent in this election than he has his traditional Conservative. And that's because Anna Keenan is a good candidate. She's the former provincial party leader. But Wayne Easter, in the early stages, an 18-vote lead in Malpeque. 62% of the vote went his way. We will watch that. Egmont is the only riding on PEI that has changed hands in the last 30 years. And this is a really interesting start. Logan McClellan was not even born when Bobby Morrissey won his first seat provincially. Bobby Morrissey was a longtime provincial MLA before he got the federal seat in 2015. Early going. We'll caution that, I'm sure, from our bench. But Logan McClellan, just 26 years old in the financial planning industry, he with a super early lead.
Okay, thanks for that, Heather. The results are starting to come in now from other provinces on the Atlantic, still standing by. The votes are now being counted in St. John's East. Per Nick Whalen and Jack Harris, who might have a longer night than they predicted. Vashi is here with me. You had, I just want to go back to the Green Party for a moment. You had an interesting interview with Elizabeth May early on that I do actually think, it was before the campaign started even, but I do think it was an initial setback for the campaign because it then led to other positions that were sort of unclear.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we don't have a crystal ball, and I take Mr. Bevan-Baker's point and Althea's to look towards the West Coast for sure. I don't know what's going to happen, but if you contrast the Green campaign, and particularly Elizabeth May with the NDP's campaign and Jagmeet Singh, if you're looking at the idea of what kind of expectations they came into the campaign with and whether or not they met, exceeded, or didn't meet them, I think that the answer would be different in those cases, right? And part of the problem for Elizabeth May was she wasn't clear initially on a couple of positions, and she got a ton of scrutiny for that because momentum was behind her campaign coming into the last 40 days. So everyone was paying a lot of attention to what she was saying and what position she was taking and whether or not they were clear. We were not paying the same kind of attention to Jagmeet Singh at that juncture. When he started to ascend in the polls and in his popularity, it was kind of so late in the game that he missed that part of the campaign, and so he was able to capitalize on it, I think, in a very different way than Elizabeth May. And so as a result, that may impact what we see tonight in her fortune.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
The way campaigns go is sort of as you start to attract more attention, you also attract more scrutiny. And the two positions Elizabeth May, maybe I'll bring Chantal in here, was the one on her being pro-life, is how she self-described, but that her party was open to protecting women's rights. And then she had this other issue around a candidate who had left from the NDP, who went to the Greens, and she said he was a separatist but not a sovereigntist, and she seemed confused about whether those things...
Or actually the reverse?
The reverse. It was the reverse. And she seemed confused that those two things were radically different or not. I'll just give you 30 seconds on that, and then I'll bring in David Cochran.
Yes, but even on the day of the election launch, Singh had his message more focused and more together than Elizabeth May. And if you're going in with momentum for the first time, you should be ready for more scrutiny. And it looked for the first 2 weeks like they weren't. And that, I think, kind of took her out of the game for sure in Quebec. The separatist is not a sovereigntist thing kind of screamed, you don't know anything about this place.
Okay. Let me show you what the map looks like right now. And you can see there on your board at the bottom of the screen, too, we've got Liberals leading in 7 ridings, and the Conservatives now on the board with 2. David Cochran.
Yeah, we're going to update you on some of the results in Newfoundland and Labrador while we wait, especially for St. John's East. We're going to show you the standings right now in St. John's South, Mount Pearl, Rosie, where Seamus O'Regan is seeking re-election, and he has a narrow 38-vote lead over Anne-Marie Annison. You can see there part of the problem. Only 2 of 185 polls are reporting. We've got an update in St. John's East, Rosie. A bunch of young people showed up, needed to be sworn in. That's why the voting is coming late. And here in Bonavista, Buren Trinity, this is a show of strength from the Conservatives I don't think a lot of people expected. Terrence Rogers, the Liberals, in the lead at 132 votes with 55 polls reporting. But Sharon Vokey with nearly 1,700 votes there. She is the riding president. She is the former executive director of the provincial party. So she would presumably know how to organize and who the good organizers are there. But that's a stronger showing from the Conservative in that area than I think a lot of people would have expected in early returns.
Okay. Ian has some results now from New Brunswick, Ian.
Yeah, this is Miramichi Grand Lake. We're going to take a look at Rosemary, and it's riding in the central part of the province. As you can see, the Conservatives in the lead there, but still so early. Just one poll reporting, just a lead of 3. But one thing I want to talk about quickly about this riding is that a Liberal strategist was pointing out to me that there are parts of 5 provincial ridings in the Miramichi Grand Lake area. In the last provincial election, 1 went Liberal, 2 went Conservative, 1 went Green, and 1 went People's Alliance. So a lot of right-of-centre supporters in that riding, and the Conservatives could do well there as we count more polls.
Okay. Ian's tracking things in New Brunswick. We'll check back with him, but David's got some news now.
Yeah, Rosie, we have our first projected elected member of parliament of the night, and it is in central Newfoundland. It is Scott Sims, who we have seen enough to project that Scott Sims will be returning to Ottawa as the member of parliament for Costa Bay's Central Notre Dame. He has a big rural riding, Rosie. He said it was too big to go door to door, so he used to go store to store. Clearly, voters like what he's selling. Scott Sims is going back to Ottawa.
And he's often the first, this is often the first riding where we get an elected person, an elected MP, and Scott Sims wins that pool if you had him on your pool tonight. Ian, you've got some more results.
Yeah, let's talk about Fundy Royal, and it's one of the ridings that I took a look at a little earlier on as a riding where there are people from both the Liberals and the Conservatives that think that if there's going to be change in the province, it could well happen in this riding. Again, we're just looking at the first of many polls to report, but it will come as a surprise to no one that Rob Moore, the former Conservative MP, is in the lead. Here's something, though, that might come as a little bit of a surprise to some people. In 3rd place, the Greens. So it's just one poll reporting, but let's keep an eye on the Green results, not just here, but elsewhere in the province of New Brunswick.
Yeah, and again, what we want to watch for is not necessarily whether they win seats, but what they do to other people's chances to win seats in terms of the percentage of vote going up. I should say it's very, very early right now, but the Conservative vote across the Atlantic so far is up. A little bit. The Liberals is down. NDP's is also down. But again, early results and the percentage of votes sometimes will still mean that you'll be on your way to winning seats. David's got more results right now, David.
Yeah, we're going to go to Cape Breton, where we've got some early results from Sydney, Victoria. And Rosie, this was a riding where Jaime Batiste, the Liberal candidate, caused some controversy early in the campaign when the Conservatives went through his Twitter feed and found some inappropriate comments, in particular about Indigenous women. The Conservatives called for him to be fired. The Liberals stuck with him, and now he has a narrow 8-vote lead over Eddie Orrell. And finally, St. John's East, welcome to the party. Jack Harris with a 9-vote lead over Jody Wall, the Conservative candidate, the mayor of Pooch Cove. He's got a lot of well-organized provincial members of the House of Assembly working for him, so there could be a good show of strength from the Conservatives here. Nick Whalen, the Liberal incumbent, in 3rd place with, what do we got? Oh, 1 of 182 polls reporting, Rosie. So the floodgates aren't quite open yet.
So Conservatives don't, throw a party because you've got Newfoundland back yet in any way. Megan, I'll just get you to weigh in on what you're seeing broadly in the Atlantic.
Okay, so here you see there's that map.
PEI is a Liberal stronghold, and we don't expect much change there. But really, it's been a 2-party race. It's been Liberals and Greens. Peter Bevan-Baker's done a great job, really, with the Green brand provincially, and that's translating federally, and it is going to matter in future elections, even if they don't win seats. And I do think with David Kuhn for the Greens in New Brunswick as well, also very popular, very respected. The question in New Brunswick really, it plays more because there are more parties that we're looking at my screen
like this, like a fucking boomer.
It's a lot is happening so far.
But hard to see any real trends from this so far. But again, these are just early polls reporting in each riding, so we'll start to firm up. Remember, we've only got one person really elected at this stage. David has some more results now.
Yeah, Rosie, the one trend we have is that it's slow. But we're going to go to New Brunswick now, to St. John Rothsay, which is a rematch between two people from the last election. Wayne Long has just a 2-vote lead over Rodney Weston, who he beat in 2015. Long is sort of running as a bit of a maverick there. He's broken ranks with the government on a lot of things, wanting an inquiry on SNC-Lavalin, voting against small business reform. He's running a very individual campaign, sort of a maverick, and Elsie Wayne without the sweater. His campaign sign says, standing for them or stands for you. He's hoping he can maverick his way back to Ottawa.
I liked that a lot.
You're welcome.
That a lot. Heather's got some more results now.
Getting some of our first in from Nova Scotia, Rosie. Let's start with Central Nova. This is a riding we're going to be watching very closely. Sean Fraser, the Liberal incumbent, the parliamentary secretary to Catherine McKenna, starting the night with an early lead, well, tied right now with the Green. This will be a real surprise for Green, but again, we're just starting the night. I do want to highlight the third-party candidate at this point. Yes, the George Canyon, the country music star. The Conservatives roped in their star candidate. We're going to talk a lot more about him tonight. But really what to keep in mind with this riding is, yes, it's Liberal held right now, but this is McKay country. This is Peter McKay's riding. This was his father Elmer's before that. This is the riding where Elmer stepped aside for Brian Mulrooney to get his seat in 1983. This is very much Conservative territory. We'll watch that riding closely. And my goodness, I'm looking forward to getting real-time analysis on this riding tonight from Roger Kusner, because this is his former riding. And he held that every year since 2000. His successor, Mike Kellaway, beginning the night with an early lead over Alfie McLeod, who signs across the area. Just say Alfie. Everybody knows him from provincial politics. We'll watch this one very closely.
Yeah, and he is very well known, so that he has that name recognition edge. And we'll see whether this was a Roger Kusner seat or actually a Liberal seat. I'll get him to weigh in a little bit. I should tell you just broadly, though, that the Liberal vote, again, early results, but the vote share, the share of popular vote does seem to be down. It's a little softer in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, which is sort of the places where you would expect that to happen. Let's go now back to Charlottetown PEI, Louise Martin. She's got the Premier with her, Dennis King.
Yes, thanks very much, Rosemary. So I'm here with PEI Premier Dennis King, and you know, we're talking a lot about a minority government and the real possibility that this election could go that way. You're the leader of a minority government, but a much different campaign here on Prince Edward Island. You all were really nice to each other, hugging, and I barely got you to say anything bad in the debate, in the leaders' debate. So what is your advice going into a potential minority situation here?
Well, still a lot of votes to count throughout the night and throughout the country, Louise, but I think you have to put all of the differences aside after tonight and take the verdict from the people. The people of Canada are going to tell all the parties, this is what we want our parliament to be reflected as, and they expect you to go to work and figure it out and put those differences aside and to work for people. And it's time to put those attitudes aside and make this about people again.
Some of those differences are pretty deep, though, when you're looking at the difference between the Liberal Party of Canada and the Conservative Party. So how do you get past some of those fundamental issues?
Well, I think it starts by recognizing that Canada is a big fabric. There's many parts that make up this quilt that is Canada. Same thing we have here in Prince Edward Island. We have differences of opinion, we have differences of philosophy, but at the end of the day, you have to put all of those aside, try to make things work, find some compromise here and there, work together, figure a few things out, and make it about people. It's going to be very, very interesting to see if that can be done. I think Canadians are expecting, whatever the result here tonight, for Parliament to work effectively for Canadians, and it's up to everyone elected here tonight to do that.
All right, Premier King, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That's with PEI Premier Dennis King tonight.
Okay, thanks, Louise. That's some good advice from the Premier. We'll see if everybody pays attention to it by the end of the night, or whether they even need to. I should tell you that the Liberal vote, again, down about 10 percentage points in terms of vote share. But remember, they had everything here, so they can afford to lose a little bit of support, broad-based support, and even a couple of seats if they have to. Roger, does any of that surprise you there? And that the support would be down a little bit, particularly in places like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia?
No, as I said before, you know, we had lightning in a bottle in 2015. Everything sort of came together. 10 years, Conservative government, people, you know, governments wear out. There was a pushback against Prime Minister Harper, so just everything sort of came together for us. For us to win Fundy Royal, for us to win Southwest New Brunswick, those have long been traditional Conservative seats. So, but you know, the sad part, and I know that Megan can speak to this as well. You know, I served the last 4 years with 31 other colleagues, and we know that we're going to lose some this evening. I can say they all went out, they worked hard for their constituents, they fought for their constituencies and their ridings, and so we'll lose some people tonight, but hopefully, you know, we're going to be able to sustain a strong vote and a strong presence and contribute nationally.
Yeah, this is sort of the brutality of politics, is that
It's a tough neighborhood.
It's hard.
You know, with Megan, when I heard that we had an opportunity to beat Megan in her riding, it was sort of mixed emotions. You know, Andy Fillmore's a great member of Parliament. I love Andy. He's a great friend, but Megan and I were friends a long time, and
but this is healthy. I mean, for one region, for one area to be one party is not very healthy. Every single seat in Atlantic Canada is Liberal right now, and I don't think that does Atlantic Canada well. You know, and you can say the same for other parts of Canada, for Alberta, for downtown Toronto, for, you know, pick your place. I think the color map here is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Corey, I'll get you to speak to this. I mean, that is, you know, sometimes how people feel when they choose a minority government is they just want to sort of rein everybody in a little differently. And particularly when we get to Quebec, we might start to see that they just want different kinds of representation in Ottawa.
Yeah, or as I think there's some indications in the polling that we're seeing this, that it's actually a none of the above sort of vote. Like we've seen, I think each of the major parties go through the course of the campaign some errors. You know, where it's unusual that you see like it's unusual that you see main party support go down over the course of a campaign, and even though the NDP support has come up somewhat, you know, I think it's probably a reasonable assumption that they're going to end the night with fewer seats than they had in the last Parliament. So it's it almost feels like less of an endorsement of minority governments and more of a frustration with some of the current options, and that's unfortunate in a bunch of ways.
Okay, I want to show everybody some tape right now of Justin Trudeau. He's been watching results. Maybe he's watching us now with his family in Montreal. He's there with his wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, and his 3 kids, Xavier, Ella Grace, and Hadrian. They're all there watching. I imagine Hadrian doesn't get to stay till the very end because he's the smallest of the bunch. They were out voting with him earlier today in Papineau. And this part of oh, look, we've already got a yawn out of Hadrian, so that's the end of him. He may not see what happens to his dad by the end of the night, but they are watching the results unfold there in Montreal. We'll probably get tape from all the leaders who want to let us in and see how they're spending things. Looking pretty relaxed tonight. We'll see how things go. Ian's got some more results.
A couple of ridings, Rosemary and New Brunswick reporting their first results, one poll in each case. And let's begin with Tobique-Mactaquac, a riding that it identified earlier as one that the Conservatives are hoping to pick up. They have a small lead at this point. And Acadie-Bathurst is a really interesting riding. You can see the Liberals here with the one poll reporting doing very well. This was Yvan Gaudin's riding for the NDP for a long, long time. And he was concerned that Jagmeet Singh had not campaigned in his riding, in fact, hadn't campaigned in New Brunswick at all. Singh did make a visit to Acadie-Bathurst and took the candidate around. And he is now in second place there. But it's kind of a four-way race, really, at this point.
Yeah. And again, the early results here, but you're starting to see them down on your board there. Liberals into double digits with leading and elected, and the Conservatives coming up fast now at 8. They seem to be doing well. This is certainly a good signs for them. Heather, you've got some results now.
I do want to watch Cumberland Colchester, Rosemary, because it'll answer the question, is this a Liberal riding, a Conservative riding, or a Bill Casey riding? He's not running this time, but voters followed him from Progressive Conservative to Independent, away from politics, back in as a Liberal. As they say, they followed him everywhere. Where do they go now? Do they go to the Liberal, the NDP, formerly MLA Lenore Zann, you see her in second place? Do they go back with traditional Conservative roots, Scott Armstrong, who used to be the MP in those hiatus years, he with an early lead? And let's go next to Cape Breton Canso. for Roger Kuzners' We're going to be We're going to be following this really closely.
Canadian
this has flipped since we
politics,
last
why?
checked in it. Again, Alfie MacLeod, the longtime provincial politician. Keep in mind, this is a riding with, in its current configuration, has never elected a Conservative MP, Rosemary.
Okay, thanks for that, Heather. Let's give you a sense of what's happening and why you're seeing those numbers bounce around a little bit at the bottom of your screen. And it's because some of these places are simply at this stage too close to call. The Conservatives are in first in all of these races, but you can see that the margin there is 14, 3 votes apart, 7. So you may see them leading now, but that doesn't mean they're going to hold that because all of these ridings just too close to call right now. And that's why those numbers will start to move around a little bit. Maybe the Conservatives will hold them, maybe not. Right now, 3, 10, 14 votes apart. Clearly, those numbers are still very fluid. Let me just show you the map on the floor to give you a sense of where we are so far in the Atlantic provinces. Little tip of orange there with Jack Harris still leading in St. John's East. I thought I saw a little dot of orange in the middle too, but maybe I'm crazy. Lots of red, and the Conservatives picking up some places where you would expect them to be leading, New Brunswick and in Nova Scotia. Vashi, your thoughts on where we're at right now?
Well, taken with the note of caution that you
All that,
exercise there
yeah,
for sure,
yeah.
and understandably so. I mean, as Corey mentioned, anything in the double digits for the Conservatives in the Atlantic is considered that's a good start for them, very much so. They're, from speaking with people on the campaign, if they're able to get something in the double digits or be, 10 or above seats, they consider that a good start. They consider that a good omen. That's their best case scenario in Atlantic Canada right now. So that would be a good sign for the Conservatives, with the other added note of caution that Chantal offered earlier, which is that sometimes Atlantic Canada isn't necessarily driver or an indicator of exactly how the rest of the country will play out, but certainly that's on the high end of expectations for the Conservatives.
Okay, and remember, the Liberals had all 32 seats when they were in 2015. Let me show you where Yvonne Jones is at right now. Yvonne Jones is elected in her riding of Newfoundland and Labrador. Let's go to Duncan McHugh because there aren't, I'm not sure how many Indigenous candidates there are total. I'm not
62.
Sure.
62.
Look at you.
Yeah, 62 Indigenous candidates.
All right, and so that's our first one elected.
There you go. Yvonne Jones is Inuit, and she served as the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. But I want to pick up on something that Ryan McMahon pointed out. It's often thought that Indigenous folks in this country are too small a number to make a difference in this election, but the Assembly of First Nations has said that there are 63 ridings, priority ridings, where the Indigenous vote could make a difference. And so looking at this Liberal win this early on, obviously we're early on here, but Yvonne Jones doing well in the Atlantic, that's got to be a shot in the arm for the Liberals, because of course there has been some criticism of the Liberals. Justin Trudeau really inspiring Indigenous voters in 2015 to come out in the second highest turnout that Indigenous voters have ever had. But then, did he live up to the promises? Did he made a promise that it was going to be the most important relationship, no relationship more important to him. But there has been concern in this campaign that Justin Trudeau just has not carried on with those Indigenous platforms and promises that he made. So, Yvonne Jones being elected, that's a good sign, early sign for the Liberals about how they may do as we start to look at some of those northern ridings where Indigenous voters make a difference.
Indigenous youth in this country, the fastest growing demographic, so certainly they could pull their power here and show people. And I think also probably not enough discussion of Indigenous issues, I would say, throughout this campaign. But if people are worried about the difference between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer, who doesn't talk about it very much at all, that might be something that would motivate them as well. But we'll dig into that a little more as we go along. I'm going to Andrew Chang now, who's going to use the floor here to give us a picture of where we're at as more results come in the Atlantic.
And so here's the big qualifier to keep in mind, that we only have about 50,000 votes in the system right now in a part of the country, the Maritimes, where we would expect by the end of the night to see something more in the ballpark of 1 million votes. So we're still only a small percentage of the total votes. But this starts to give you a sense of where the overall picture is going. The important bit of context to help you understand where the pluses and the minuses fall here is that considering how well the Liberals did back in 2015, sweeping the entire Atlantic region, winning all 32 seats, they have no ground to gain here tonight. They only have ground to lose. And that's reflected here in this graphic. You can see they're down 10 percentage points in terms of their popular vote. But look at those other bars. You can see the NDP also dropping in terms of popular vote. it's the Greens that are up, and of course, the Conservatives that are up. So the Greens in a lot of these ridings, that's really fascinating to see them not, of course, taking first or second place, but in a solid third place position. A lot of those NDP votes going in that direction. And of course, the Conservatives, the ones who are able to parlay their increase in their share of the popular vote into actual leads in seats as we stand right now. And let's talk about those seats. You remember earlier, I talked about the Liberals, their path to a majority government, if that's in the cards for them. They can afford to lose 16 seats across the country. Right now, they're down in 10. What does that mean? Well, they're still within that 16 threshold, but keep in mind, we're only through Atlantic Canada right now, not even all of the Atlantic Canada seats reporting, those ridings reporting. We don't have results from all of them just yet. And of course, there's all of the rest of Canada. So the fact that they're at -10 right now means they've got a very uphill battle for the rest of the country if their goal is to form a majority government. This is not the greatest of starts for them. It's not that they can't make up that ground, but it's uphill. And again, the Conservatives, they have a big mountain to climb. 72, plus 72 was their target in terms of forming a majority government. They're at +9. Not exactly home free by any stretch. Still really early, but that's a start.
Well, the vote share graphic that you showed there was pretty interesting because it doesn't really indicate that the Liberal vote share going down is going to the Greens or the NDP. It seems to be a direct transfer to the Conservatives.
That's right. Yeah, they're the big beneficiaries.
Yeah, no reason for anybody to panic at this stage, but certainly not the best start for the Liberals. And not doing the splitting that we maybe had anticipated for Atlantic Canada. Ian's got some results now.
You know, a lot of these results at this point in New Brunswick are just one poll reporting, and so it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, look at this, it's kind of interesting. But as Andrew was speaking, one of the first result polls actually has turned into a little bit more in terms of results. Madawaska, Restigouche, we now have the Liberal in the lead, but look how close the Conservatives are. This is a riding the Bernard Valcourt won for the Conservatives back in 2011, but in 2015 the Conservatives had dropped to third place, but they're doing pretty well so far tonight with 3 polls reporting. And Beausejour is interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, Dominic LeBlanc has not been able to campaign in this election. He's been in hospital in Montreal. There had been hope that he might be released today, but I just checked. Unfortunately, he's still in hospital, though his campaign manager says that he's doing, all things considered, relatively well.
20 to 7 to 1.
But a big story we're going to be watching in Beausejour through the evening is Green Party does here. Not that I think it might have been the first riding, Tantramar, in the Sackville area to bring in NDP MLA many years ago. They have a Green MLA now in Memram Cook, Tantramar, and a lot of support in that community, Rosie, for the Green Party.
Okay, so something to watch for. Of course, Dominic LeBlanc, if he'd been totally healthy and ready to go, he would be leading a lot of the campaigning in the Atlantic provinces for the Liberal Party. Heather's got some results now.
That number I mentioned, Rosie, 5, the number of Liberal incumbents not seeking re-election this time, and in most of those ridings, the Conservatives running provincial MLAs. That's the case in West Nova, where Colin Fraser went back to his law practice in Yarmouth, and for the Conservatives, Chris D'Entremont with an early lead over Fraser's executive assistant at the time, Jason DeVoe, as we watch West Nova. Halifax West is one the Liberals would expect to hold. Jeff Regan going for his 7th term. He's held this since 2000. He is the speaker currently since 2015, and that Regan name in Nova Scotia, his father, the former premier, his wife, Kelly, a cabinet minister provincially. This is one we want to watch closely. South Shore St. Margaret's. This is Nova Scotia's only female MP. She is the first female cabinet minister ever from Nova Scotia. That's Bernadette Jordan, named to cabinet after Scott Bryson left. She's the Minister of Rural Economic Development, and we look early going. She, in her second go, with a lead to start.
Okay, thanks for that, Heather. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen there that things have flipped a bit. Liberals leading or elected 19, Conservatives in 8, and that's because some of those close to call races that I was showing you a little bit early have now flipped the other way. So, very early stages here. I would imagine the party is still watching closely to see if they can hit their targets. We know for the Conservatives, that's double digits, and Liberals holding on to whatever they've got. David, you've got some results.
Yeah, we're going to take our first look at Charlottetown, Rosie, where the Greens could have a real impact in that race there. And the early results have Sean Casey just with a 20-vote lead over Robert Campbell running for the Conservatives. Darcy Lantier, the former interim leader of the provincial party, is running third. Early results, the fear here for the Liberals, though, is that the Greens could split the vote and help the Conservatives or win it outright. And the numbers are rolling in St. John's East, where Jack Harris is out to a nearly 500-vote lead over Nick Whalen, with 22 of 182 polls reporting. As each poll comes in, Rosie, the NDP line lead widens. If that keeps happening, the arse could be out of it for Nick Whalen, but back in it for Jack Harris. And we're going to take a look at Sydney Victoria, which is one of those flip-floppers. Jaime Batiste now is ahead of Eddie Orrell with a 14-vote lead. Again, small numbers, only 5 of 196 polls reporting. Eddie Orrell, one of those former PC MLAs who's decided to try to take the run in federal politics, slightly behind Jaime Batiste early.
Okay, thanks for that, David. We're actually going to go to Sydney, Victoria, Nova Scotia, to Eddie Orrell's headquarters there with Kayla Hounsell. Things are very close. How are people feeling tonight, Kayla?
Well, you know, Rosie, I think Eddie Orrell's team here at his campaign headquarters in North Sydney are feeling very confident. I have had a chance to speak with Eddie Orrell himself quite a bit today. He's been in and out of his campaign headquarters here. He told me he's feeling pretty good, but it was also clear from chatting with him that he knows he's in a tough race tonight, and that is, of course, what we're seeing unfold here, largely because this is a Liberal stronghold. But also because when he's been on the doorsteps, he told me he knocked 20,000 doors, and he has been hearing from some people who are reluctant to embrace Andrew Scheer. So it's sort of a situation where we like you, Eddie, but we're concerned about some of the ideas of your leader, comparing him to Stephen Harper. The Harper Conservatives, of course, closed down the Veterans Affairs office here in Cape Breton, also made some changes to EI that affected seasonal workers here, so there is some concern about that. Beyond that, this riding has been held by the Liberals for 19 years, with Liberal Mark Eiking now one of the 5 Nova Scotia Liberal MPs deciding not to re-offer this time around. So the Conservative strategy here has been to run provincial politicians, as David Cochrane was just mentioning. Eddie Orrell is one of 3 Nova Scotia Progressive Conservative.
The gains that the Conservatives were making now seem to be largely eclipsed by a strong showing in the Atlantic Canada. While the Conservatives have made gains, it seems that they have
MLAs who have decided to resign their seats in the provincial legislature and try federally this time around. But this riding hasn't voted Conservative since 1974, and it has voted Liberal in 11 of the last 12 federal elections, Rosie.
Okay, Kayla, good context. But there's a nice vibe there, so who knows what'll happen. I like the music in the background. Kayla, thank you for that.
Anyone's guess at this point.
We'll check back with you a little bit later. And I want to show you the too close to call board again, because you can see the numbers have bounced around at the bottom of your screen. And that's because some of the places where we were just a few votes apart have now flipped the other way. They've flipped into the red column. But again, you can see that we are not in any definitive stage with any of those ridings. Halifax, Sydney, Victoria, where we just were, Kings Hants, Scott Bryson's old riding, 5-27 apart. Those are very, very tight margins. So I wouldn't expect anything there on the bottom of your screen to be completely solid yet at this stage. There are 14 ridings, in fact, in all of Atlantic Canada that have a margin of less than 50. So that's pretty close to call. And it might give us an indication of just how tight tonight will be, if this is any sort of warning on that at all. Many of you were asking where he was. He's here. He's filled his empty chair. Peter Mansbridge has made it now. Good to see you, Peter.
It's tough, you know, being retired.
Is it?
You tend to fall asleep a lot.
Stop it.
I was downstairs meeting with young people.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of them in the atrium of the CBC building.
That's great.
Who've come to watch the program, watching you right now. And we're all very involved in getting out the vote on the part of young people today. Yeah. And that is terrific. It's a great part of the democracy that we saw unfold across the country tonight, and they're very much responsible for it in the Toronto area.
And you spent some time in the Atlantic provinces for your documentary that you aired last Friday. What was the vibe you got there?
Well, I was mainly around Fredericton, and as you know, Ian has mentioned, Fredericton's an interesting place to watch tonight because the Greens are a factor in that riding and could have an impact on what ends up happening. But, you know, the board you just showed of the too close to call, if that's an indication of the night we're going to have, that board is going to be very, very long by the end of the evening when we go across the country, which argues to this fact that, you know, there's entirely possible we won't have a result tonight. There'll just be too many things up in the air if it remains close.
Yeah, so
we'll see.
and that's why the Liberals and the Conservatives can look at that, what's at the bottom of your screen there, and both still be very hopeful about how this night is going to end.
I mean, at that point, in those numbers, they can all take something out of those.
Totally,
numbers.
yep.
You know, it's not the end of the world for anybody.
For anybody, no.
And it's not the beginning of a new world for anybody yet either.
No, not quite yet. I'll just give you a sense of how the vote share is splitting in the Atlantic provinces, though. It's interesting because we had perhaps anticipated that we would see the NDP and the Green Party sort of splitting the vote in different ways. That doesn't really seem to be what's actually happening there. It's really the Liberal vote loss is transferring almost directly to the Conservative Party. And in the case of the NDP, their losses in terms of overall support switching over to the Green Party. So, you know, voters do unexpected things, and that's what we're seeing a little bit tonight. I'm going to go to Corey now, if I can. So again, there are lots of close to call. I don't think the number will stay at 5, but we'll see how would Conservatives be viewing that. Would that be worrying, or they're looking at my too close to call board and they're okay?
Well, I was liking it a lot better when it was 9.
Yeah.
Because I think 9 is a really acceptable number for the Conservatives, and you know, if it's between 8 and 12 for the Conservatives coming out of Atlantic Canada, then I think there really is hope alive for, that's quite strong and realistic for the Conservatives winning the largest number of seats. When it starts, you know, dipping down into lower single digits, it starts becoming a very steep hill that you have to climb in some other very challenging markets in order to get to that threshold. So I think we're going to be riding a roller coaster, Rosie, because I'm kind of on pins and needles watching that number go up and down.
Yeah. No, and again, no reason for anybody to panic here, because everybody's still, things are close. This is going to bounce around, and there's a lot more ridings to come. Chantal, does the fact that there are so many that are close to call, what does that indicate to you?
It's too early to really say this is the pattern for the rest of the night. You were saying about the Liberal vote going to the Conservatives. I'm not from the region, but my understanding is it's usually the two main parties, that, and people do flip back and forth. It may be a bit different in places like Ontario, where an NDP voter often will go to the Liberals, but I think in Atlantic Canada, there is a tradition of if you didn't vote for the Conservatives this year, you may vote for the Liberals the next time. Because those are the two dominating forces.
But it does show that the two other parties, and particularly the Greens, where there was some provincial support, can't punch through. At least not yet.
Can't punch through, but are a problem for the NDP that spent years trying to get a real foothold there and is not getting it back tonight at this rate.
Okay, David Cochrane's got some results from the 60.
Yeah, we got 2 first results starting in King's Hands, which if the Liberals did lose this seat tonight, Rosie, this really would be Scott Bryson's fault. But Cody Blois is off to an early 50-vote lead over the Conservative candidate. Bryson gone, but not forgotten, at least in the early polls, 2 of 223 reporting. And now take a look at Fredericton. And look at this. It's early, but look at this 3-way split. You've got Matt DeCourcy with a 2-vote lead over Jenica Atlin, the Green, and then only a 3-vote lead over the third-place candidate, Andrea Johnson. And this is what the Liberals were worried about in Fredericton. A real strong presence by the Greens, where they could either win the seat outright or bleed enough progressive support away from the Liberals to hand it back to the Conservatives. So Matt DeCourcy, it's early, and he's in tight, Rosie.
Okay, and I think that would not be unexpected for the Liberals, as you say. We're going to get pictures of all the leaders watching results through the night and seeing where their fates land. This time it's Jagmeet Singh with some of his supporters and his wife. They are watching, of course, in Burnaby, British Columbia. Extra points to them because they appear to be watching our broadcast. So that's... but no, it doesn't really matter. They're going to watch through the night and, of course, react as results come in. He's all the way out on the West Coast. Remember, he's only been in the House of Commons since earlier, a year and a half now, because he opted to wait a year and a half, rather, to run for the riding of Burnaby South. So he's only been an MP briefly, but certainly has done better than most people had expected. Jamie Poisson's got some brief impressions from the people watching along with her at the watch party.
Okay, thanks, Rosie. So as we're watching all these results coming in, we're talking leaders. How do they do? I'm going to start with Ryan McMahon, writer and comedian. Ryan, it was the first time that you voted in 2015, and you mentioned earlier that you voted for Justin Trudeau. Why?
Well, other than the anyone but conservative wave that hit in 2015, I mean, there was just as an Indigenous person, there was a lot that was said that sounded really good. The nation-to-nation talk, the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I mean, there were a lot of big-ticket items that the Liberals campaigned on.
Yeah. And how do you feel now, 4 years on?
Well, I would like to start tonight's drinking game and just say every time we hear the words Trudeau disappointment in the same sentence, we drink.
Okay.
If Canadians need an excuse to drink.
Okay, well, we've got coffee instead of alcohol, unfortunately. Marie, can I ask you about that? It does feel like the sheen wore off at some point, and when do you think that we started to see that veneer crack?
Well, I think Jody Wilson-Raybould was a significant factor in all of that, particularly when someone presents themselves as a feminist and two very strong, capable women end up leaving. But I think we're seeing a lack of authenticity across the board, quite candidly, and it's really hard to put your finger on who these people are. And so that's troubling.
Mark, can I get you to jump in on that? Do you feel like we saw a lack of authenticity across the board?
Well, I think this is a referendum on Justin Trudeau's leadership. That's really what this election is about. And I think it was hard to believe 3 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, that he wasn't going to just waltz into a second majority. Andrew Scheer, I think, has done a reasonably good job of trying to avoid all the mines and just not make too many mistakes. But it's a situation where I think the sheen came off the Liberal leader pretty quick. He got elected on the basis of promises of progressive nature, promises to the Indigenous people, promises to women, and he broke all of them.
Okay, and I think some people might disagree with you when
I hope
about,
so.
And that's what we're going to do when we talk about Andrew Scheer. Maybe he didn't avoid all those landmines. But last word to you, Mayor Nenshi, the only politician on this panel. Did anybody shine during this election campaign?
Well, yes, I think Jagmeet Singh shone. I think Monsieur Blanchet shone in terms of what he needed to do. The challenge that I have is that this election has been way too much about personality and way too much about leadership. Both Mr. Scheer and Mr. Trudeau have great teams around them. We never heard from them.
Like
we never saw them. The ministers, the candidates, right? And that narrow-minded focus, which I think was caused by both the Liberals and the Conservatives going personally after the other leaders, kept us from actually talking about the issues. There's some real terrible election promises and some very good ones, and we hardly talked about any of them.
But we've never had an election where we talk about issues.
No, I think in 2015
Kim Campbell did get in trouble for saying that elections aren't for issues. We actually have to go back to Rosie, but we're going to keep talking about those issues tonight, and I hope that you come back to us soon, Rosie.
Okay, thanks for that, Jamie. We should probably remind people that all those people at the table come with interesting perspectives that we can dig into a little bit more as well if we go back to them, because that might color what they're saying as well. Where are we going next? Andrew. There you go, Andrew.
All right. Let's do it. So I want to help folks visualize a point that you were making earlier in terms of how the vote is splitting. Just to give you a little bit of context, we still only have about 135,000 votes in the system, which is a small fraction of what we would expect to get for all of Atlantic Canada. And as you can see, 24 plus 6 plus 1 at the bottom of the screen, that only adds up to 31. There are 32 ridings in Atlantic Canada, so we're still missing results from one. But focus on the red bar just for now, because what you want to look at is the fact that they're down. The Liberals are down 14.2 percentage points. The Conservatives are up by almost that amount. So if you're wondering, if you're trying to answer the question, where is that Liberal vote going right now, that gives you at least a shade of the answer. And you can see a similar story with the NDP and the Green results, right? The NDP down 1.5 percentage points and the Greens up 2.9 on the night so far. Again, still lots of votes to count in the Atlantic region, but that gives you just a sense of how those votes are balancing out with each other. And if you're wondering why these votes, these numbers are so volatile, it has to do with the total number of votes that we've been counting so far. But also, think of what our decision desk has to do in terms of trying to crunch the numbers and trying to project how the numbers are ultimately going to pan out. Right now, so you see the Liberals leading or elected in 24 ridings. There are only 8 of those that are locked and loaded, that we're sure about, based on all of the historical data, the polling data, and of course the results as they're coming in now. There are 8 of those ridings that we're sure of. That leaves 16 that are still up in the air. And you can see with the Conservative and the NDP numbers, I mean, the Conservatives leading in 6 ridings right now, but none of those 6 are we absolutely sure about? So a lot of these races still volatile. So if you're wondering, why it dropped from 9 down to 5, then it was up to 7, trickled up to 8, now it's back down to 6 for the Conservatives. Gives you a bit of the answer why.
Okay, and that's important to keep in mind because it looks pretty crazy at the bottom of your board there as things bounce around pretty rapidly. That's because we still got a lot of too close to calls, and so the numbers are going to move throughout the night. A reminder that in about an hour or so, we will start to get results from the rest of the country, but for now, we're still looking at what's happening in Atlantic Canada, and Ian's got some more of those results now.
Rosemary, the Conservatives I talked to in New Brunswick said if they could get 5 seats this time around in New Brunswick, that would be a pretty good day. Anything more than 5 would be great. Let's take a look at the party standings right now in this early counting period in New Brunswick, and you see that the Liberals are leading or actually elected in 1, but a total of 5, Conservatives 4. The reason that only adds up to 9 is that Moncton, strangely, has not reported a single poll to this part. But I want to show you a couple of the ridings within New Brunswick. Madawaska, Restigouche. No one I talked to suggested that this was going to go the Conservative way. Now, look, it's really close, 41 votes separating the Conservatives from the Liberals here, and also not many polls reporting just 17 of 156. Big result there for the Greens. You see the Greens and the NDP almost neck and neck between 3rd and 4th place. And Miramichi, Grand Lake, now this was a riding that the Liberals were a little bit concerned about. Again, close, again, early in the counting. So interesting. We can easily expect some flipping in the party standings in New Brunswick as more votes get counted. But where's Moncton? I mean, I know where it is geographically, but how come we haven't heard from it? It is really strange.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can get an answer for you on that one.
Okay.
Get Moncton, check it out there. Phil Ling, he's back there. He'll look into it. Heather's got some results.
All right, let's check both of the provinces I'm watching, Rosemary. We haven't looked in PEI for a while, so Cardigan held by right now the longest-serving MP on the island, and in fact, one of the longest-serving members of the House, Lawrence McCauley. We have him elected for his 10th term in the easternmost riding of Prince Edward Island. 3 on Nova Scotia. In Nova Scotia, that
calling this number that's supposedly a North Korean hotel, even though it's a San Francisco number. Here we go. Looks like a cell phone number. So, Still someone watching.
that boy, the NDP is watching closely. They think
Corsi's riding, he is the incumbent, and he is currently tied with Andrea Johnson, the Conservative. I realize we're just in the early results, but that's still pretty astounding. There are 9 ridings where there is a margin of only 100 votes, and there are 13 where there's a margin of 200 votes. So if the polls are true, that things started tight and they're ending tight, those are the ridings where we are starting to see an illustration of that. David Cochran's watching the swings.
Yeah, Rosie, all of the Newfoundland and Labrador seats are now settled. The CBC Decision Desk has projected them all elected. And the final one is St. John's East, where Jack Harris is going back to Ottawa. He has 1,371 vote lead over Nick Whalen, the now 1-term Liberal Member of Parliament. The Decision Desk has seen enough. His lead has been widening as every poll came in. Jack Harris coming back to work with Jagmeet Singh. And look at this. Eddie Orrell has moved out to a 389 vote lead over Jaime Batiste. Orrell, of course, one of the Progressive Conservative MLAs running federally for Andrew Scheer. Jaime Batiste got in a spot of trouble, Rosie, throughout this campaign with his Twitter account. Some unfortunate comments about Indigenous women. The Conservatives wanted him fired. Eddie Orrell, Justin Trudeau didn't do it. Eddie Orrell may do it for them.
Okay, let's go to Megan to get some reaction to Jack Harris pulling it back.
Yeah, congratulations, Jack Harris. I think this is good. Obviously, it's good for the NDP, but it's also good for Newfoundland and Labrador just to have another voice there in Parliament and another perspective in Parliament. You know,
What do you think that does? What do you think that does? That's the second time you mentioned it. How does it change the conversation inside the House?
A pretty quiet issue much earlier in the mandate was around Supreme Court judge appointments and whether or not Atlantic Canada should have an appointment from Atlantic Canada. And you didn't hear anything about it in the House of Commons. It was a silent issue. And you know, it's Liberals appointing the court, and it's also all Liberals in Atlantic Canada. And so if there had been an opposition member or two, we could have actually heard a debate about that on the floor, maybe some questions in question period. It's hard to stand up when you are the governing party and say, hey, what about my region? And so I think regions are not very well served when it's uniform.
Although some of them have done that, as David points out. Scott Sims did it. You know,
paid the price.
Yeah, and paid a price, but I mean, he still got reelected. So
you know, Rosie, on that point, if I can, with 32 of 32, the fisheries, for example, no discussion in this election about fisheries policy, aging demographic issues in rural Newfoundland and rural Atlantic Canada, big issues. When you do have a split legislature from a region or split representation, those issues can get on the table more than they did when it was all of
well, there's a way to put pressure on the government in a way that maybe you didn't expect. I think Chantal wants in, and then we'll go to Hannah.
Yes. It doesn't speak to feeling that you've been totally ignored by the government.
Fair enough.
Because Atlantic Canada voters are not shy at expressing anger at the federal government, but 25 out of 32, maybe 26 when Moncton comes in because it's a fairly liberal riding. It's hard to think that it can get any better except on a year like 2015.
Okay, but again, as I say, there are lots of too close to calls there, so you know, that might bounce around a little bit more, but I take your point. This isn't exactly, at this stage anyway, a repudiation of what the Liberals have done for Atlantic Canada. Hannah Thibodeau is in Burnaby, British Columbia, where I'm sure the crowd went wild about the Jack Harris win.
Well, we don't have the crowd in here as of yet. You have to remember the time difference. They're coming in a bit, but we do know that their campaign team are extremely happy about this. And let me tell you the reason why. What they were doing, they were watching Jack Harris's riding and a few others in the Atlantic provinces. So Jack Harris for them shows that they may have some momentum picking up because they did such a good job towards the end of that of the campaign. Some other ones that they're watching, Rosie, are Dartmouth, Cole Harbour. Right now, the Liberals are leading in that riding. Also Halifax, which is Megan Leslie's old riding. Acadie Bathurst, which was Yvonne Gaudin's riding. Those are some of the other ones they're thinking that if they could potentially take those ridings, you might see that Singh surge, as you've been hearing about throughout the campaign, actually taking place. But when I look at those other ridings, other than Jack Harris's riding, it appears that those other ridings are still being led by other parties, mostly Liberals. So they're going to keep their eye on that, but they are really happy that they've sent Jack Harris back to the House of Commons.
Okay, Hannah, thanks for that. Hannah is in BC, where the NDP headquarters for the party will be. I should tell you, though, that the NDP support is down overall in Atlantic Canada. So they may get a seat out of this, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to get much more than that at this stage. And maybe the Jagmeet Singh impact, the Singh uprising, or whatever he was calling it, hasn't actually transferred into this part of the Singh surge. Thank you, that's what it's called. Let's go to St. John's East, though, and that's where they will be celebrating about Jack Harris coming back. Peter Cowan's there.
Rosemary, I'm here with Alison Coffin, who's the provincial NDP leader, and you were working pretty hard today offering rides, even piggyback rides if people needed it in order to get out. 4 years ago, Nick Whalen beat Jack Harris. Tonight, Jack Harris beat Nick Whalen. What's different tonight?
I think that people realize that there was a strong base for New Democrats. We saw a solid campaign coming from Jagmeet Singh. We know that New Democrats are here for the people. We know that every New Democrat that is going to be elected will be there to speak for people. And I think that resounded well. We are also seeing that we are the voice of change, and people are listening.
with the prospect of a minority government, what sort of role do you think that one NDP, because right now it is only one NDP, certainly within Atlantic Canada, what sort of role do you see him playing?
Certainly in a minority situation, it means that we can craft better policy, it can be better balanced policy. We're going to see the needs of more people reflected in our legislature, and I think that's going to be very important.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll let you go enjoy the party. I think they just brought an accordion in, so that's always the sign in Newfoundland and Labrador that the party's about to begin, Rosemary.
And that's why we love Newfoundland, because accordions appear when you most need them. Peter, thank you for that, and thanks the leader of the NDP as well. Appreciate it. Ian, I believe, has some results.
Yeah, so one of the things that we should caution people, and we've talked about this before, is you look at the bottom of the screen and you see that board and you think, well, this is a good idea, sense of what the lead is for the Liberals, but some of these ridings are so close, and New Brunswick is among the places that has those close ridings. So first of all, we have found Moncton. It's not just the place where Champlain Mall is, it's also the place where they're actually counting some votes. You know, that Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor is in first place, the health minister, won't come as a surprise to anybody, but two things might. First of all, that the Greens are doing so well there. This is a riding that has gone back and forth between Liberals and Conservatives for a long time. And the other thing is that lead. Only one poll reporting, but still a slim lead. Let's look at a couple of other ridings, though, with more polls reporting and a really slim lead. Our board is not capable of reflecting the fact that the Liberals and the Conservatives are tied in Miramichi, Grand Lake. And one more close one for you, Madawaska, Restigouche, okay, you know, 51 is still a pretty small margin with this many votes counted. And, you know, somebody on Twitter said, I had it all wrong with the Greens. I said the Greens are getting way more votes than they're actually getting. Well, they're getting a lot of votes in some ridings like Fredericton. And in Madawaska, Restigouche, the number of votes they're getting could determine who ends up, or help determine who ends up winning this riding.
Yeah, and they are up across the Atlantic region. So again, caution that doesn't always mean you win a seat, of course, but it does mean that you're stealing some support from elsewhere. And, you know, that could be the NDP, it seems to be at this stage anyway. So they're up about 4 points from last time round. Althea.
Yeah, I think for the Greens, you know, coming up second could possibly be a win. Although Fredericton seems to be moving around, bouncing about. There's only 10 polls reporting, but there are fewer than 20 votes separating the Conservative candidate and the Green. The other riding that's really interesting is Beauséjour, where the Greens came in second. CBC is suggesting that that's going to be Dominic LeBlanc's seat. It will continue to be Dominic LeBlanc's seat. But on the ground, another riding I visited with Elizabeth May, driving in the backseat of the Tesla, driven by a volunteer. We stopped in that riding. A lot of local people were suggesting that, you know, Dominic's not doing very well. Obviously, he's in Montreal for cancer treatments. He hasn't been that present in the riding. But also, they're comfortable parking their ballot somewhere else because they don't fear a Conservative coming into that riding, for example. The Liberals have tried to make this campaign a fight between them and the Conservatives, but in some ridings, strategic voting doesn't work that way. And so there's a safety in casting your ballot for another vote, and I think another party, and I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of Green supporters in Atlantic Canada.
Okay, I think I want Roger Cuzner to talk about Dominic and Dominic LeBlanc in just a minute, but Andrew wants in there.
Just to say that this is converging more or less on what the polls were predicting, pretty close, and also converging back to normalcy. You know, you look at some of these Newfoundland ridings where we have the most results, where last time they won by an average margin of 50 percentage points, and we're looking here at more like 6, 14, 13, that kind of thing. Across the region, the Liberals beat the Tories by 40 percentage points last time. It looks like it's going to be more like 10 percentage points. I think I'm going to be very interested to see what the turnout numbers are, though, because that's the Liberal fear is that their voters aren't going to be as motivated as they were last time around, and that's the best hope for the Conservatives to catch them.
Okay, I should tell you that all polls are reporting now in Atlantic Canada, first reporting anyway, so that's 32 out of 32 reporting. And in 3 ridings, those places that Althea was talking about, the Greens are in second, in Beauséjour, in Fredericton, and in Moncton. I'm going to go to Heather next, but I am going to come to you, Roger. Don't you worry. Heather's got some results. First results.
From Quebec.
From Quebec, oh, that's right, because we have the Magdalen Islands.
Exactly. Gaspésie, Ile de la Madeleine is an hour ahead, so this gives us, and Chantal perks up, and we see what happens here. You remember 2015, because it's 2015, there was Diane Le Boutillier prominently in that cabinet photo as Minister of National Revenue. Again, just one of the